Well, good morning, you guys. And you guys are so good at that. Good to be with you this morning. I do want to invite you to open your Bibles to John chapter 16. That was just read for us, both in the call to worship and just now as Josue read more to that to us. As we've walked through these chapters this fall, there's been many great points of application for us. But there's been one thread that seems to be consistently happening throughout, and we've talked about it and you've seen it. And it's this thread that the disciples are very anxious because Jesus told them at the end of chapter 13 that he was leaving them. And so in verse 1 of chapter 14, Jesus says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." Don't be anxious about this. Right, and so this has been like a running theme throughout, and many scholars actually have referred to this theme as the anxiety circle, And it's in our passage this morning that anxiety circle is broken. It's finally broken. See, what's going on in the disciples' life is what goes on in our lives often. Right? Anxiety is created within us based upon all the what ifs. All the unknowns of what's ahead of us. It's just in the not knowing that makes us anxious. I mean, there's so many examples we could give of this, but here's at least an easy case in point. Let's just say your friend texts you after the service and says, "Hey, can we grab dinner tonight? I need to talk to you." What do you say? "I'll clear my calendar," absolutely. But then what are you thinking for the rest of the afternoon? Are you thinking, "Oh, they probably just want to tell me all this good stuff going on in their life and how much they love me as their friend," and is that what fills your mind? No, all the unknowns, all the what ifs that are so natural to us that we begin to think like, "Oh no, what did I do?" Right? What's going on in their life? We think of worst case scenario stuff, and then the anxiety rises, and then you have the meeting, and often you leave and you're like, "Oh, that wasn't as bad as I was thinking," because you've psyched yourself out. See, uncertainty is the norm in our lives, and the reaction to our uncertainty is anxiety, and that's exactly what the disciples are going through. In the same way, you guys, no matter who you are or where you are at this morning, we all walk in here with a similar commonality. We all walk in here with something. We all walk in here facing something. We're all going through something. And so the question is, how are you going to face your something? How are you going to face it? Are you going to face it with anxiety, or are you going to face it with peace? And is peace even possible? Is it even possible? To put it in the exact language of our text this morning, are you going to face your uncertainty with a troubled heart, or as Jesus punctuates at the end of our passage, are you going to take heart? Are you going to take heart? So Jesus breaks this circle of anxiety this morning, not by giving us more what ifs, but by telling us what is. So powerfully, this will help you in your anxiety of what ifs when that begins to spring up. And so what we're going to see is 4 words that Jesus speaks to us this morning that are intended to defeat and stomp out your disorienting anxiety. Okay? Number 1. What does he tell you? Your sorrow will turn into joy. We see this in verses 16 through 24. In verses 16 through 19, you see this question just sort of rolled around back and forth, almost in a way that makes you wonder, why is there so much ink spilled on this question? Because it says, "A little while and you will see me no longer, and again a little while and you will see me." So some of his disciples said to one another, "What is this that he says to us? A little while and you will not see me, and again a little while and you will see me, and because I'm going to the Father." And here's the core of their question. So they were saying, what does he mean by a little while? They're like, how long is he going to be gone? We do not know what he's talking about. Jesus knew that they wanted to ask him this question. He knew this, and they're not asking it, and so he's so good, he brings it up, and he says, "Is this what you're asking yourselves? What I meant by saying a little while and you will not see me, and again a little while and you will see me?" Just back and forth, back and forth. Their question is, how long will Jesus be gone, and what will that mean for our lives? And Jesus has an answer for them. Jesus' answer is that his leaving will be a means by which their lives are changed forever. How? Well, look at verse 20. Truly, truly, I say to you, you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice. The world, again, we talked about this, that stands opposed to Jesus. They will rejoice. You will be sorrowful while the world's rejoicing, but your sorrow will turn into joy. Notice exactly what the precision of what Jesus says here. It's really important. He says joy comes through sorrow. It doesn't do a roundabout sort of backdoor thing. It doesn't just show up disconnected from the sorrow. Joy comes through sorrow. And they're going to be confused by this. He anticipates this, so he gives them this illustration. Look in verse 21. When a woman is giving birth, she has sorrow because her hour has come. But when she has delivered the baby, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being has been born into the world. Now, when it comes to giving birth, I am not an expert, okay? I'm just gonna be really honest with you. I've seen some births. I can testify that it looks very painful, okay? And my wife has assured me it is very painful, okay? I remember, it's actually interesting how often this image comes up in the New Testament. And so years ago, I actually sent an email out to some women in my church because I was like, I've never given birth. Can you describe it for me? And so in that thread, reply all thread kind of gave way to a whole world that I don't want to enter into too much with you. But here's a few things that they said, okay? So if you're sitting here and you're like, I've never given birth, this is actually important for you to get, okay? So one person said, I think the pain of childbirth is like being finally cornered in the dark alley corner by the guy wielding the knife after running for your life. You have no escape, you're out of energy, you anticipate the worst, you have no choice but to take the impending pain and you just want to die. And she put a smiley face at the end of that, which I don't know what that's about, but I'll just read one more. There was a lot of these, but one more said, it's like you ate some really bad Mexican food and the pain discomfort just comes in waves every few minutes. Pretend you're curled up inside a very small cardboard box and the only way out is to stretch out your legs and burst through the packing tape on the bottom, except mom is in the box. It kind of makes your eyeballs want to pop out of your head or throw up. So, yeah, that doesn't sound fun, right? It sounds like Jesus says sorrow. Right? Extreme sorrow. And Jesus, he's not trying to gross out his disciples, right? He's illustrating the process that they will actually have to go through to experience joy. And it is a real, deep, heavy sorrow. It is painful. It's not mild. Jesus is going to leave. What is Jesus talking about? He's talking about his crucifixion. They are going to watch their leader, the one who they believe is the Messiah, hang on a cross and die. And then they have to sit in the emptiness of Saturday. And nothing is different than that reality. But he says, but you will see me again. Look in verse 22. So also you have sorrow now, but I will see you again. And your hearts will rejoice. And look at this, no one will take your joy from you. See, Jesus is showing us that joy always overwhelms the pain, but it doesn't delete it, but it overwhelms it. Just like when a woman goes through the pangs of childbirth, it was awful. You can't escape the hour. But then you lay that baby on their chest. It doesn't delete the pain, but it overwhelms the pain. See, he's talking about death and resurrection. Jesus knows something about sorrow. Isaiah 53 says he was the man of sorrows. He stood in front of Lazarus' tomb and he wept at the death of his friend. He stood over Jerusalem and he could see the whole scope of it, and he wept over Jerusalem which had strayed from God. He is on his way to Gethsemane right now in our passage where he is going to sweat drops of blood. He knew something about sorrow. He knew that sorrow is not the enemy of joy, it is the vehicle of joy. Guys, you can't have Easter Sunday without Good Friday. You can't have a crown without a cross. You can't have resurrection without death. You can't have joy without sorrow. He's reminding us that sorrow will not go away, but when you realize that he is alive today, like Jesus is alive right now, if that actually takes deep root in the soil of your heart, no one can take that joy away from you. You're going to face sorrow in this life. This is now a Christian paradigm that the disciples are going to have even post-resurrection. He says at the very end of this text, in the world you will have tribulation. There will be more sorrow. But there is a joy that you can have in the midst of sorrow that no one can take from you. I'm just curious this morning, is where you're getting your joy from, is that something that somebody can take from you? Is your joy stealable this morning? Is that even a word? Can someone take it from you? I mean, I bought a beach ball for my kids to play in a pool with, and there was joy for the day, but the next day it got poked a little too sharply and it deflated. And something as silly as a beach ball went from joy in one day to depression in the next day, right? Even a beach ball. But what about your relationships? Right? What about the fresh starts? What about the other things? They're not bad things, they're good things if you use them and relate to them appropriately. But is your joy something that can be taken from you? Jesus is saying, I promise you, through my resurrection, a joy that no one can take from you. It can never be taken away if you find your joy in Jesus. I love how one golfer said this. He knew of this joy, a British golfer. He says, we are not in the land of the living, going into the land of the dying. We are in the land of the dying, going into the land of the living. That's what Jesus' death and resurrection means for you, that you now have a joy that you're headed to the land of the living. Secondly, you are loved by God. That resurrection gives way to a whole host of other words that Jesus speaks to you now that will stomp out your anxiety in the face of the uncertainties. You are loved by God. Look in verse 23 on the way down. In that day you will ask nothing of me. Truly, truly, I say to you, whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he will give it to you. Until now you have asked nothing in my name. Ask, and you will receive, that your joy may be full. I have said these things to you in figures of speech. The hour is coming when I will no longer speak to you in figures of speech, but will tell you plainly about the Father. In that day you will ask in my name, and I do not say to you that I will ask the Father on your behalf. For the Father himself loves you, because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. I came from the Father and have come into the world, and now I am leaving the world and going to the Father. So Jesus is saying, I've said all these things to you. And what he's referencing there is the entire upper room discourse that we've been walking through. And he says, I've been using these images, these figures of speech. It's been happening throughout his earthly ministry. He said things like, I am the bread of life. I am the living water. He said a multitude of different images for us. He is the vine. He is the light. And what he's saying is, I've been speaking to you in figures of speech because, not just because you can't understand it, it's because some things haven't taken place yet that would actually cause you to understand it. And he says, now, I'm not going to speak to you in figures of speech. I'm not going to speak to you in these figures of speech. And so look at what changes, though. I love this. He says, I will no longer speak to you in verse 25 in figures of speech, but tell you plainly about the Father. What is this showing you? That the reality that God is your Father is not just a figure of speech. It's a hard, firm reality. He just talks to you plainly. God is your Father. And what does he say about God being your Father? Verse 27, he loves you. He loves you. Why does he love you? Verse 27, because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. Now, there's some dangerous things that can happen here with us because we can think that God the Father didn't ever really love us. But because Jesus came and we loved him, that he reluctantly now goes, okay, fine. I don't know if this relates, but it's kind of like your kids go off to school and they make a friend, and that friend now comes to your house, and you now care about that kid. Whereas before you didn't know they existed, and so you kind of maybe even reluctantly love this kid who now comes into your home because of their association with your own child. But that's not what's happening here. Not at all. God doesn't say, oh, well, since you love Jesus, then I will love you. That's not true. God has initiated love with you. Look at verse 29. His disciples said, now you are speaking plainly. No, I'm sorry. Look at verse 28. I came from the Father, and I have come into the world. Remember, God loved the world, so he gave. We love because he first loved us. We see even here that the love of God is an initiating kind of love. He has initiated and displayed and demonstrated his love for you by sending you the Son. So if you've recognized him as the Son, if you've believed this is God, incarnate deity, and if your heart has wrapped its arms around him in faith, then you now have a new relationship with God. You've been reconciled to God. You've been brought into his family. God is now called your Father. You can call him your Father, and that's just not a figure of speech. That's your reality. How does this love describe itself for you here? Well, it's very concrete, because what Jesus is showing us here is that the love that God has for you is described with the sense of access now. The fact that God is your Father means you have access to him. That's what's going on in verses 22, 23, 24, 25, and following. He's talking about this access that you now have in prayer to God. I mean, I feel like I could stand up here right now and tell you guys genuinely, I love you. I really do. I pray for you. I pray for our time together here on Sundays. If you're a member here, I'm praying through all the members that we have on a list, and some of you, I've never seen your face, but I'm praying for you, right? You know, I love you. And if we talked afterwards, I would have a genuine sense as I speak to you, like, I care about you. But when I go home and I hug my kids tonight and I put them into bed and I look at them and I say, I love you, I mean something very different when I say that to them than when I say that to you. No offense, right? Why? Because my love for them is special. They belong to me. I'm their father. They're my kids. And with this special love comes a special access, and that's what Jesus is drawing out here. He says in verse 26, in that day you will ask in my name, and I do not say that I will ask the Father for you. What's the implication of Jesus there? He's saying just ask him yourself. He loves you. Just ask him. You have the access. I mean, if my 8-year-old Gus comes in the middle of the night while I'm sleeping and wakes me up while I'm sleeping and he's scared, I welcome that. I love him. Well, I kind of welcome that, right? I should probably caveat that. You know, I'm not always super pumped, but at the same time, I love him, right? I'm like, oh, you know, what's wrong, you know? He has that kind of access to me. That's not strange. Not at all. I love him. He knows that he can come and he can wake me up in the middle of the night even. Now again, I love you, okay? But if you walked into my room, right, in the middle of the night while I was asleep and you woke me up, you would discover that I don't love you the same way that I love Gus, right? Again, I love you, but you don't have that same access just to show up in my house in the middle of the night while I'm sleeping. Okay? Maybe you can get really close to Gus, and maybe you can call his a little Alexa or something and ring him up and have him go into the room for me and wake me up if you have that kind of an emergency. Do you see? But it'd be strange, it'd be creepy, right? If you just showed up in the middle of the night. But do you see what Jesus is saying to you? You have that kind of access. I mean, God doesn't sleep or slumber. He's not like that. But even if he did, which he doesn't, okay? Even if he did, you could go right into the room. That's the kind of love he has for you. It's an access kind of love. Do you realize this? When you're so anxious about the unknowns and the what ifs, you have access. You have access. Number 3, not only will your sorrow turn into joy, not only are you loved, but Jesus says you are never alone. Verse 29, his disciples said, now you're speaking plainly and not using figures of speech. Now we know that you know all things and do not need anyone to question you. This is why we believe that you came from God. And Jesus answered them, do you now believe? Behold, the hour is coming. Indeed, it has come when you will be scattered, each to his own home, and will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me. The Father you have access to. See, the hour he's referring to here, as we've seen over the last 2 months, is a reference to his death and resurrection. Jesus says it's coming. And the disciples say, now you are speaking plainly. Now we understand. And Jesus' response is what? Finally. I've been saying it, and you finally got it through your thick heads. Is that what his response is? He goes, no. Now do you believe? And what does he say? Do you believe? The hour is coming when you will be scattered. See, the disciples think they only need these words of Jesus. They only need his teaching. And if they could just get their mind around his teaching, then they would finally understand what he's talking about. They would finally believe. I just need knowledge. I just need a little bit more reasoning from Jesus. And now I finally get it. And Jesus says you don't need insight. You don't need more information. You don't need new knowledge. You need resurrection. That's what he's saying to them. They think they're equipped to believe, and Jesus points out that through their own actions, that night, that they will show that they still don't know, that they don't fully get it. They don't believe. They don't believe. Look at verse 32 again. The hour is coming, indeed it has come. Can't escape it. When you will be scattered, each to his own home, and will leave me alone. Guys, here it is, the great reversal. This is actually when the anxiety circle begins to be broken. Because all along the way, their hearts have been anxious. They've been troubled because Jesus is going to leave them. And here Jesus says, contraire, you are going to leave me. He sought to comfort them all along the way. I'm going to return to you. I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'm going to bring you to where the Father is with me. I'm going to send the Spirit. You will see me again. And they're anxious about his leaving, but he's not abandoning them. They're going to abandon him. And he's amazing. Jesus is amazing. He doesn't point like a bony finger in their face, and say, hey, you want to talk about abandonment? You're really the ones. That's not what he does. He just simply says, hey, this is what's going to happen. And when it happens, it'll reveal to you that you haven't really believed it yet. You've spoken well, you've spoken truly, but it hasn't really got its tentacles around your heart. Guys, tell me, how is it that Jesus can so plainly state that they are going to leave him alone and it doesn't seem to faze him? His closest friends, in his moment of greatest need. Here's a question for you. How can it be that the people that you love the most, the people that you've given the most to, the people that you've sacrificed the most for, how could it be possible to have those people turn on you? People like maybe your parents, your spouse, your significant other, your best friend. How could it be possible to have people you love abandon you and turn on you and still somehow not be overcome with that anxiety and grief? How can you face that kind of anxiety circle in your life? Well, it's the same way that Jesus breaks the cycle. What does he say? Yet, all of you will leave me. So you could say, yet, fill in the blank, the person that you've sacrificed the most for, that you care about the most, that you feel like you need the most. Yet, fill in the blank, you could leave me. Yet I am not alone. Do you say that? Do you believe that? As people come and go in your life, you could say, I am not alone. I am never alone. Why? For the Father who I have access to is with me. I can ring him up right now. He's right here. What a weapon in the face of your anxiety. Right? Jesus says this here. But do you see that when everyone left him in his moment of greatest need, he went to the cross and he's empowered. He's empowered by the reality that his Father had not abandoned him. And in going to the cross and dying and rising from the dead, he has secured the Father's presence in your life because you are promised, and we've seen that when you believe in Jesus, you are now in Christ. Your salvation is in Christ. This is why he says he is the vine, you are the branches, we are in him. You get his life. His benefits, they're applied to you. If the Father will never leave Jesus, then you can know that he'll never leave you. Are you worried this morning that the Father is going to leave Jesus? No. Then what a cure. I mean, maybe this is your biggest fear, that you will end up alone, and that's no small thing. That's not something that I take lightly. That's not something that God takes lightly. And we know that he hasn't taken it lightly, because he gave Jesus to endure the worst suffering so that you could know that you will never be alone. What a weapon against your anxiety. When you begin to feel like everyone has turned on you, you can go to a passage like this and say with Jesus, I am not alone, for the Father is with me and he loves me. Number 4. So Jesus, in the face of all our what ifs, in the face of that kind of anxiety, he says, your sorrow will turn into joy and no one can take it from you. Says the Father loves you. You have that kind of access. He says you will never be alone. And then lastly, as if that's not enough, he says Jesus wins. He says, I win. I win. Verse 33, I have said these things to you that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world. I don't know if you've heard of Ernest Shackleton. He was an explorer, and in 1914, he sent a famous ad out in the London Times. He was going to take a trip to the South Pole, I believe. And this is what it said. This is his appeal, okay? Tell me if you want to do this. Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return, doubtful. Honor and recognition in case of success. 27 psychos signed up for that, right? Jesus says, in this world you will have tribulation. Guys, the resurrection doesn't fix the hardship you face right now. So you have to be honest, and Jesus says to you, is following me worth it? And maybe you read an ad like that, and you think that's what following Jesus is like. In case of success, honor and recognition. But Jesus, before he even goes to the cross, before he's even risen from the dead, talks about his victory in the past tense. I have overcome the world. And we know that he has, because he's been risen from the dead. This is the same world that Jesus said to us in verse 20, truly, truly, I say to you, you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice because they think they won. Christ has died, but then everybody saw him again. He overcomes. This is the grand conclusion that through this victory, he now offers you peace, which in Jewish thought was the experience of wholeness, a satisfying life. And he says this peace is found in Jesus. In the world you will have trials, he says, suffering, hardship. That does not sound like peace. But, Jesus says, take heart, even in the face of the unknown, even in the face of the opposition that you face today, even in the face of that sort of anxiety, I win. I've won. It's past tense. It's a certainty that this world cannot find anywhere else. This is not a word of warning. Guys, this is a word of victory. It's a word of good cheer. Like, how is this even possible? Well, this peace that Jesus offers you, it comes from standing solely on the ground that Jesus is going to win and that he has actually won. If that's the ground that you stand on, you know that's the narrative that this world is headed towards, that this world is experiencing. There's a peace that comes with that. D.A. Carson said this about this passage. He said, Jesus' point is that by his death, he has made the world's opposition pointless and beggarly. What a great word. The decisive battle has been waged and won at the cross. The world continues its wretched attacks, but those who are in Christ share the victory that he has won. They cannot be harmed by the world's evil, and they know who triumphs in the end. From this they take heart and begin to share his peace. Guys, Jesus has won. And his victory has been achieved for you. Like, we get how this works. It's been well noted that I'm a Niners fan, okay? And I'm in Ram country, okay? Because you guys won a Super Bowl. Congratulations. This afternoon, the Niners and the Rams will play a game. And let's just say that my Niners lost, okay? I'm just thinking the word. I don't know the outcome, right? See, it's the ifs, right? Like I've said. But let's just say my Niners lost, and on the last play of the game, Matthew Stafford throws a touchdown to Cooper Kupp, okay? And you're a Rams fan, you're diehard, you got a blue and yellow painted face on while you're watching the game, whatever. What are you going to say in that moment if you even care about it? Are you going to say, Cooper Kupp won? Matthew Stafford won? No, what are you going to say? We won. And then you can come see me at the fall festival and I would be crying and I would say, we lost, you know? Although I never put on shoulder pads, I didn't get dirty, I didn't get a broken collar, nothing. You know, I didn't do anything, right? Even though I didn't suit up at all, I will say, use the language, we won, we lost, that sort of thing. We do this all the time, don't we? When our Olympians go and compete in the games, we go, we won. I didn't do anything. But I'm a part of this country, I'm a part of the Niners fan base or whatever it is, and so what they do, what they achieve is now applied to me and I receive the benefits. This is exactly what Jesus is saying to you. That he fought a war that you couldn't win. And he went through that sorrow and he came out the other side for the joy that was set before him. And he is victorious so that you now, by placing your faith in him, say, we win. This is the truth of the gospel that is given to you by your Lord Jesus Christ in the face of your what ifs today. That the outcome is fixed, that he is victorious. And so today, we don't wake up in the morning and look at ourselves in the mirror like the world tells us to and tell yourself, I am strong, I am smart, I am beautiful, I am sufficient. That's not what we do. We don't do the self-help thing. And we also don't wake up and go, I'm the worst, I'm horrible. No, we look in the mirror and then we look out the window, as I've said before, to the victory of Jesus and we say, he is strong, he is beautiful, he is sufficient, he is victorious. We don't just lift up our eyes from our circumstances and place them on us trying to achieve an outcome or a victory in our life. We lift up our eyes in the face of what ifs and we place them on the victory that Jesus has achieved and is applied to you. Jesus wins. He wins. In 1952, Florence Chadwick, who's a famous swimmer, she stepped off the coast of Catalina Island and she attempted to swim across the Pacific Ocean to the land. She's a very famous swimmer. She was the first woman in history of the world to swim the English Channel both directions. Okay. I could not get far at all. Okay, I don't know how people do this, but she did this. She stepped off the coast and she was swimming. She swam for 15 hours. Have you done anything for 15 hours before without stopping? 15 hours. It was cold, it was really foggy. And there was these boats that kind of floated next to her, and her mother was in one of the boats. And at one point while she's swimming, she's begging to be taken out of the water and put into the boat. The fog is just so thick. She can't see anything. She's exhausted emotionally, physically, every which way. Her mother said, no, you're really close. The shore is not that far off. I could see it. But she couldn't see it. And so she got up into the boat and she quit. When she got on that boat, she could see that she was less than a quarter mile from the shore. In the press conference the next day, you want to know what she said? She said, all I could see was the fog. I think if I could have seen the shore, I would have made it. She was told how far she was. It didn't matter. She couldn't see it. Here's what I'm telling you guys. Your what ifs, your anxiety, the unknowns of your life can feel like a thick fog. You don't know where you're at. It's hard to see what's ahead. And I could stand up here this morning and I can tell you that your sorrow will turn into joy. I can tell you that the Father loves you and you have access to him. I could tell you that you are never alone, even though when you feel like you are. I could tell you that Jesus wins. But unless with the eyes of your faith, you hear that from Jesus, his voice will finally cut through the fog to where you actually can see the shore. This is a vantage point that you're being given while you're swimming in this world, to know what's ahead, even when you feel like you're not going to make it. Anxiety is like this. It's the what ifs. But guys, this morning Jesus tells you there's a joy to be had, and it can't be taken from you because Jesus is alive. There's a love you can know because Jesus went through the cross. There's a knowledge you can have that God is with you wherever you go because he's alive and resurrected. And there's a victory that you haven't achieved that's applied to you because he is alive. He has endured the trouble so that in your troubled heart you can take heart.